Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure being here and having the opportunity to share with you parts of the work we have been doing and of the issues and the challenges we have been trying to address. And when we're trying to put in perspective what we're talking about, let's talk about some numbers. I'm an engineer. I like to communicate with numbers and some takeaways if you want to quantify how important is this topic. Well, 40% of the energy we use goes to buildings. About 30% of the emissions to the environment are related to buildings. Wow. So the challenges we're facing are related to a sector, the built environment, that gives us the opportunity to address in order to be able to handle the global issues, the environmental issues, the energy issues. But what makes it more interesting to make our lives better? At home, at work, at our office, at our business, it's all about the buildings we live and work and what we're actually paying to operate. So realizing that this sector has to be handled and it has the challenges, it has the opportunities to be able to address these issues. The EU has committed to meet these challenges by certain targets, specific targets that actually are evolving, being legally binding, which means it's the law. And we have to actually commit and actually reach these goals. It's not just a scientific, technical discussion. What sets the stage at European and also global, but also national level, and what drives this process are the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions. So the EU and all EU member states have committed to reducing and setting these goals to over half, as you see here, tomorrow, 2030. That's tomorrow, over half of the emissions we have to cut it. And then there are supporting directives, regulations, talking about energy efficiency and renewables that actually are providing the means to achieve this commitment. Just a few days ago, the new European directive on the energy efficiency was released, setting more obligations to all of us, to all member states, to achieve these goals and targets because, hey, we know where we are up here. We know where we want to go by 2050, which is calling for the decarbonization of our continent, of our countries. Is that going to be easy? No. Look what we need to achieve. So these efforts, who's going to be driving, who's going to be providing some solutions? Most of the plans are calling and pointing to the buildings. That's where they're expecting to gain the benefits. That is putting a great challenge and a great opportunity because there's business, huge business, because we're talking about millions of buildings, billions of square meters of existing stock that has been a great investment, both financial but also cultural. It's a great value. The numbers say about 70% of the buildings that would exist in 2050 that would have to really be high performers exist today. Wow, I have the problem that I need to solve right now. So I need to be doing something, so there are the opportunities. The challenge there is financing. How are we going to be financing this business? Now, we know another path that will move us forward. Everybody's talking about electrification. That means we need clean, that's the key word here, green is another key word, electricity. But it cannot be an abundance of that. We don't have the infrastructure, we cannot afford it. The other day I was challenged, hey, if it's going to be green electricity, why do we care? We care. Energy efficiency is number one. It's the first priority. The best natural resource of different forms of energy is still the energy we don't use. So energy efficiency, energy conservation is the first step. We need to reduce our demand and waste, providing for our buildings to live in and work in. We need the appropriate environment to do all this, but we need to minimize waste. And the energy, the idea, the concept is, it has to be clean. So we're going to be crossing out the combustion for the operation. If you're burning, and it's common in Greece to burn oil, imagine you have an oil tank in your building and you burn it to heat your house, or natural gas, that is going to be outphased, and then that brings out part of the problem. It removes it from creating emissions at your building because you're burning a fossil fuel. But I need energy to operate my buildings. Where's it going to come from? Well, different forms. We want some distributed and local generation from renewable energy sources. That changes a little bit the idea of how we design and set up the whole system. Interconnectivity, yes. We need key here to all this, storage. And we need to be careful because we don't want to start creating other problems, environmental problems, for example, with batteries. And I recognize, I don't know if you read the posters inside where Swedish companies are working on recyclable batteries. Key challenge. We must be extremely careful not to create future issues, problems with the environment, trying to solve something else. Already, for example, in California, they have a huge problem with all the waste from where? Renewable systems, photovoltaics, that are being removed, and they end up not being properly recycled because the market cannot absorb that. So the same thing with batteries. Need to be extremely careful with that. And we need the brains. We need the smart buildings, the smart cities, in order to be able to handle all this with our network and our use. But tell you what, if we look at the future, probably we're having an easier problem right now. It may sound weird, what I'm talking about, because we need to be sustainable. What is emerging as a more global issue is sustainability. And if I would challenge you, say, what comes to your mind first when I'm saying, what is sustainability? What's a sustainable building or city or whatever? You would come up with different ideas, perspective. Are you right and wrong? You're right. And I just tried in this slide to just throw some of these concepts there because that's what sustainability is. It's not about energy, not about emissions, not about environment, not only about economy, not about social, it's everything together. Wow, now you're making it impossible to handle. Well, that's the challenge because that's really what we need to be addressing and doing for engineers, for other stakeholders, for the cities to be able to handle this. We have different systems and methods. We have different indicators, like your car. What's the mileage on your car? How much fuel you consume per kilometer? The same thing. How many, for example, waste you generate? What about your transportation? All these issues, how do I handle this complex? Well, there is a plethora, of course, of ideas and challenges, and especially once we start increasing the scale, going from the building to the neighborhood to the city. Now, how do you actually address this? Already, the EU, in this direction, this concept, has introduced a system, levels. It's going to come in our reality in the engineering world. When we audit buildings or design and construct buildings, we'll have to observe this new restrictions in terms of limitations we have for the different parameters we need to address. And there are also commercial tools and systems. What we have tried to develop, to offer to engineers, cities, municipalities, people to work in this direction is an open free system that has been designed in order to be able to help and support all these different facets, aspects, from the building up to the city. And you see, of course, the different parameters and different issues, as I said, from the energy, from the environment, from the transportation, including, for example, resiliency. How do you actually quantify or try to describe in this complex system all these issues? That's how it works. And how do you manage to communicate this information? Have developed also all this educational training material that can help. And at the end, we need to be able to come up with something that we can communicate to the people, to the, for example, the authority, financing or prioritizing scenarios for renovations, for involvements, and so forth. So we have a tool. I don't say, oh my God, there goes a guy from research and education is trying to put aside. No, what I'm trying to tell you, I'm not going to get into details, but I want you to be aware that, oh, I have a tool, so I can do something. It's doable, it's workable. It has different versions. It's not just available in different languages, which is sometimes good. It has been adapted to the local priorities, to the local information, all integrated in there. And it's open source. So this is something you expect. I work to a public institution as a public service to be able to offer something that is open and free to be used. Here's the big picture. What it stands in terms of, again, a takeaway. It helps you, it supports you from the design, the concept, down to the implementation and the monitoring. It helps you make the decision-making process easier. And while doing all this, it engages the people. It engages the citizens. It engages us, because that's part of the process in order to be able to be successful and operational in terms of what you envision, decide, start implementing, and monitoring. How successful are we in terms of the results? There is a motto: we think globally, but we act locally. Somehow we need to bridge this process, because it's down to us to be able to do and implement these concepts. This is an interesting slide just to tell you that, okay, sometimes theory is good. Talking about it is good, but what about implementing, doing something? Well, we have test drive it, the whole process, the whole concept, and as you imagine, the tools have been adopted by some of these cities, and you notice both South European, but also in the North Africa and Middle East. We're trying to see and verify that these concepts, methods, tools are applicable and doable. And with that, I would like to thank you. I think I have made to complete my presentation on time, and maybe we have some interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Balaras, for your informative presentation on the issues regarding buildings.